And just so you know, this picture was taken on March 5th this year. And you sit outside, look outside now and you think, wow, this is a changed time. So I'm going to do, I mean, we sort of said about 45 minutes, but we'll see. This talk is for you guys. Um, so please feel free to interrupt with questions or comments or whatever you wish on the way through this. So I'm going to talk three things. First of all, what is live steam? I'll show you some of the locomotives in my workshop, and I'll show you a little bit about the workshop I have downstairs. And say questions welcome anytime. The picture on the right is my Shay locomotive with the cab roof removed. Just, I'm sure you guys knew it was a Shay. So what is live steam? So we've had in North America, we've had this thing called the International Brotherhood of Live Steamers since 1932. But if you actually Google stuff, you'll notice that it's called model engineering in the rest of the world. I don't know where the term live steam really came from, but it's used here and it's not used anywhere else. So that's typical North American. But basically it's just building working models, whether it's live steam or other things. We'll go through a couple of other things in a minute. So let's go. This is a picture I took over in Britain a couple of years ago now, when you could go to exhibitions. So it's actually it's a model engineering show, which of course is the equivalent of live steam with all the other stuff. So these are small 16 millimeter gauge, 16 millimeter scale locomotives, which the way Brits do it is 16 millimeters to the foot. So what a mixture of units. So I think that works out to be about 1 to 19. These are radio controlled, most of them. You can see the guy on the left-hand side there on the table, there's a couple of radio control units. There's a flicker dicker, which of course is worldwide, and 3 coffee cups. So the Brits actually enjoy coffee the same as us. So that's the Guildford Model Engineering Society, live steamers. This is 16 millimeters, so 1/19th scale. It's actually a coal-fired locomotive. If you look under where the ash pan is, you can actually see the glow of the coal fire, which is really kind of cute. I mean, you fire it with a teaspoon, of course, and off it goes running around this wooden layout, and it hasn't caught any fires yet, I guess. So I'm going to go back. So let me see if I can get rid of the sidebar. No, I can't really. So I've got basically I said it's coal fired. It's narrow gauge, so it's it's on 32 millimeter scale. It's 32 millimeter track. LGB is 45 millimeter. They use both tracks in this kind of scale. It's about 1 to 19th. And I say it's not radio controlled, but it really could be. Here's a gauge 1 locomotive just on the outskirts of Ottawa. It's alcohol fired, or as Brits call it, spirit fired. It's model of a standard gauge German P8 locomotive running around on what is basically a flat track. So it's kind of fun watching these guys because you see a bunch of old guys trying to run around trying to adjust the throttle on these locomotives so it doesn't go too fast. It's always good exercise, and you have to watch out for tree stumps. So this is just a pan shot of this locomotive going, and it'll run 15-20 minutes on the alcohol that's in the tank and the water that's in the tender. And here's a 1/16th scale coal-fired live steam locomotive. This one is one of mine, and it's actually down at the Richmond Hill Live Steamers. It's a model of a French locomotive built in North America. They built a lot of these in North America, Montreal, Kingston, and down in Ohio for shipping to France at the end of the Second World War. And the full-size ones, there's a bunch of still exist, a few still run. And I think they were called Les Américains because, of course, they're American locomotives designed. And the French railway people hated them because they were rough and they weren't, French are very good with a lot of finesse. These things were rough and ready, but they actually ran, and they were some of the last locomotives running on the French railways. But that's a 1/16th scale locomotive. The engine part is about 120 pounds. The tender is about 40 pounds. So it's a bit of a weight to carry around. Here's so some different stuff. This is down in New Zealand, and it's narrow gauge locomotives, but running on ground track, which is basically 7¼ is the widest gauge. So if it's North America, 7¼ equals 1/8 scale. Or so 1.5 inches to the foot. So, but of course, this is New Zealand, and New Zealand is, I think they call it Cape gauge, which is 3 feet, 3.5 feet. So even if you have a standard gauge New Zealand locomotive on 4 and 3, and sorry, and 7¼ it's probably like 1/5 scale. So anyway, so you can see it's basically of all kinds of locomotives. Live steamers don't have a problem with mixing scales. So you see a Welsh locomotive against a Colorado, big locomotive, and I think the Welsh locomotive is taller. Model engineering. So this is a model engineering show. They always show all kinds of stuff. These are, of course, this is model engineering. They're steam tractors, and what you may notice is, of course, people standing around talking, which seems to sort of fit with model railroading and live steaming worldwide. If you look really closely, though, these guys have license plates on the smokestacks, or chimneys as they call them, because they're licensed to go on the road. So you'll see these guys ripping around on the city streets, and the police, of course, make way for them because they're all licensed, and yeah, it's kind of fun. So, and I don't think we'd normally call this live steam, but well, it is, and it's in Britain. They all sort of lumped in together. So a long time ago, 100 years ago this year, there was a kind of a break in the tradition of model building, because things went from like the beginnings of manufacturing all the way up to today. But 900 years ago, there's a big change, because everything before 100 years ago, for small things, it was always like alcohol fired, or spirits fired, as they call it in Britain. And bigger than that, it was all coal fired. So here's an idea. Here's something that is like 1905-ish. All right, you can see on the bottom there's these little alcohol burners, and they call them carpet burners, because of course you run them in the living room, and any alcohol that spills is quite interesting on a carpet. So that's like pre 100 years ago. And then again, pre 100 years ago, if you want to do real live steam, you needed a lot of money. I've seen estimates of, like, in the 1930s, $400,000 in 1930 for a big live steam setup. Yeah, so basically, you guys know where this is. There's a little hint in the very bottom, Britannia Park. So you can see that's the bicycle path now up along the Ottawa River Parkway, with 1227 running behind it. So this locomotive was running in Britannia Park for quite a while, and then it went to Orillia, I think. So that's pre. Go. Sorry, what's that? No, it doesn't. Okay. So 1905 roughly. So about 100 years ago, things changed. There's a thing called the Battle of the Boilers, where you have this big guy called Henry Greenlee, who was very well known, and of course from upper class, says this is the way we do it. And a younger guy who came from poverty, I don't think his father was ever around, and he worked from about the age of 8, called Lillian Lawrence, and he took the name LBSC from the British Railway. And this LBSC guy said, no, we can do small coal-fired boilers. And the big guy said, no, you can't. And they had a show off, and basically LBSC won. And since that time, we've had small locomotives that are all coal-fired, and they do really well. So here's LBSC's stuff it's a little locomotive there called, I think, Aisha is the pronunciation. And this one 100 years ago, this locomotive is still running. It's been updated a couple of times. There's an association that owns this over in Britain. And I mean, this stuff has only been around 100 years. It sounds like not much, but it is. It's kind of neat. So this is a 1/24th scale coal-fired locomotive, and one of the first ones to really successfully pull people. Yeah, so LBSC, basically, he was a very good writer. He wrote so that people like myself, who when I was a young kid, I could understand what he was writing. Some Britishisms in it, but you got used to that. And he wrote a weekly publication, a weekly column in a publication, and it's like he's known worldwide for this stuff. And he's basically the guy who really started this. So when I was a kid, a neighbor down the road had a Livestream truck in his backyard, and he let me run his locomotives, which is a lot of fun. But as a kid, I sort of thought, oh, I'll build ones. And this is the picture on the left is LBSC's Titch locomotive, which was a beginner's locomotive. And I built one of those. I started it when I was about 13 and finished it many years later. There's my Titch. It's kind of worse for wear there. It used to be nice and bright and shiny, but it's been running around all over the place. So, you know, I sort of said I thought I'd start this at 13, and I could make a bicycle carrier because I was too young to drive. But of course, you know how the way things go. Best laid plans of mice and men. Before I knew it, I was in university and women and, you know, jobs and so on. And it was eventually, I took the parts. I moved to New Zealand for a while, then over to the Netherlands, and I took the parts with me to the Netherlands, and I finished it over there. So it's got a Dutch boiler certificate, which really confuses people because they see this boiler certificate and they have no idea what it says, but they say, yeah, okay, we'll accept it. Anyway, so it's done from the Netherlands. I carry it as a carry-on baggage. And so I've traveled on Air Canada with it a couple of times, flying around, you know, put it on the overhead bins, and it goes with me. And believe it or not, you can bring coal on board an aircraft. I checked it with all the security people, of course, and they say, yeah, no problem, coal's fine. So there you go. The Shea locomotive that I built, which I think if you guys might have seen it at one of the SLD meets, this one is also, it was written up in a magazine called Livestream. And it started when I was a teenager, and I sort of said to myself, after I finish my Titch locomotive, I'll build this Shea locomotive. And it took a couple of decades. So here's a picture of it, sort of, just making pieces and putting it together before it's painted, before the boiler cladding's on. And a few fittings need to be put on there, etc. Here's the engine for the Titch. Sorry, for the Shea. The engines for Shays, of course, are removable, which really helped in full size for, for maintenance. You could just take them off the side of the locomotive. It's kind of small and kind of almost like clockwork. You can see there I'm adjusting one of the, valve head guides or something. I had to make my own little wrenches to sort of get in there. So I have a couple of wrenches with different offset hexagons to get in there and tighten these things. So again, you can see my fingers up there. It's kind of small and tiny, but it runs. It's kind of neat. Here it is, getting closer to completion. You can see it still needs like the exhaust pipe. They put an air tank, which is actually a lubricator on the side. The boiler cladding is on. It just needs painting. And the smoke box door is not there. Here it is, basically finished. The cab roof is off of it. The bell yoke isn't painted, but other than that, there it is. You know, it's glory. I made this one propane fired because I kind of thought coal is kind of dirty, and getting into the scoop into the firebox is quite difficult. So I thought, oh, I made a propane burner for it, but you have not tried yet. Maybe after COVID, we'll see. The 260, I started this when I was in New Zealand. I flew down with 2 kids and a couple of bags and started this when I was down there. And basically only the main frames were done, and I threw them in the bag when I came back to Canada briefly. And it sort of was put off into, into a box for a couple of years. I sort of thought, oh, I should just finish it up. So I'm doing that now. That's the boiler I was showing you in my hand just before I started this. There it is on its frames. The boiler is not complete there. You can see I'm sort of making sure it fits in the frame. The firebox has to go in between the frames, of course, in a British locomotive, and you have to lift the firebox up, and because it's coal fire, the firebox has to actually slide like in real size. So I have to make sure it all slides so it's attached but not firmly attached to the firebox side. Here's the again the boiler during construction. So it's all copper. Copper silver soldered, and you guys were talking a little bit about cleaning materials beforehand. What I do for cleaning this stuff is I just use citric acid which I've got a big bin of it downstairs, and you can pour it down the sink in theory afterwards. I get the citric acid powder at places that make for winemaking supplies. So on the left-hand side, that picture is almost as if you were the fireman with the back head removed. You can see the tubes and the flues. You can see the crown stays coming in from the top. They're phosphor bronze rod threaded in. The side sheet stays, they're not there, but basically I just use copper rivets that I push in from the inside. You can see some copper rivets on the bottom. There's 4 of them, and that's strong enough to hold the side sheets. The picture on the right-hand side, of course, is the boiler taken from the bird's eye view. You can see the crown stays poking up through. I leave them a little bit longer because when you're heating this, you want the heat to go into the boiler and down the stays. So by having a longer tail on them, it allows it to pick up the heat in order to allow the silver solder to melt and penetrate, which you really want it to go inside things. Here's the back head, again, showing you 2 bits and pieces of it. It's just a copper sheet over a wooden former, and you basically heat the copper up. If you've never heated copper, it's really cool because you heat it up so it's like a cherry red. You let it cool either in water or just naturally, and you can take it with your fingers and bend it. And as soon as you start bending, you can feel it tighten up because it sort of self-hardens at that point. You heat it again and you can keep on bending. So to do these firebox formers, I probably heated it about 3 or 4 times and just bent it with over a wooden former with a wooden mallet, and it came out like that. You can see on the right-hand side and on the left, you can see I've put some of the fittings on already and silver soldered them in place. On the left-hand side, you can see the rivets I use. They're kind of sticking up there. And that, of course, that's the inner firebox and then the firebox backhead there. Here's the front. And this, sometimes you take a picture and you look at it later and you think this is kind of weird. The picture on the left is the tubes looking down from the smoke box side, and it looks like a lady with curlers in her hair wearing big glasses and a smile. So anyway, I think that's kind of weird, but that's the picture looking down the front of the locomotive. On the right-hand side is the smoke box tube plate. You can see a lot of the holes are nicely countersunk because you want a lot of the silver solder to go and penetrate and create like a flange in there. And silver soldering is a lot of fun. I enjoy it very much. This is the things ready to go. I had silver solder that tube plate on, pushed the whole insides through the boiler from the firebox side, and now I'm just about to do heat and silver solder the outside of the smoke box tube plate to the boiler shell. So you can see the rest of it. If you can see that, the rest of it's got a little flange or fillet of silver solder around it. So it's just the outside that I have to do in this stage. There it is, kind of coming together. The boiler's mounted. The cab is basically done. Yep. And it's coming. Now I'm going to talk about my workshop. So that's me with hair and no beard, of course, a few years ago now. And I think actually I'm working on an HO scale locomotive, turning the wheels for it. If I look at that closely, so we see you can mix and match all the hobbies. Here's this. This is my favorite lathe. I've currently got 3 lathes. This one I picked up in the Netherlands when I was over there. It's what's called an 8-inch lathe, so 8-inch diameter, it can swing. To get this up and down the stairs, it's light enough that I could put a pad on my shoulder, throw it over my shoulder, and climb up 3 sets of narrow stairs in a Dutch house. I don't know if I do it now that I'm 62, but when you're 42, it's like that's easy. It's easy to do that. So what you see here is a metal lathe. It's got a 3-jaw chuck, which is kind of this shiny silvery thing on the left-hand side. It's got the outside jaws in for gripping something that's quite big. The inside jaws are sitting on a bit of white melamine down on the left-hand side. And I'm not sure what I was turning there. It's aluminum swarf in the tray. So whatever I was doing, it was quite a big piece of aluminum. And that's that. This is the lathes are very good for doing cylinders and sometimes flat surfaces. These are what we see here, the cylinder castings for this Ivet locomotive. I'm going to go through this sort of clockwise. And I said that the cylinder castings, but the top left-hand one is actually a rough casting that I picked up from somebody. It shows you what they look like if you get the castings from a supplier. And as you go around, the middle and the top is the left-hand cylinder. They're all in black pen, I marked left on them. That's a cylinder basically ready to go on the locomotive. I still need to do a couple of things to it, but it's basically ready. The top right-hand one is the other cylinder, so you can see, if you compare the top left and top right, the bores are complete, the faces are flat. You can see the screws, of course, the holes threaded to hold the the covers on. There's between the big cylinder, the cylinder and the piston valve, you can actually see if you look closely, there's a slot in between them because you need the steam to get in and out of from the piston valve to the cylinders. So that's how that works. Going around, you can see those stainless steel rods are for the piston valves to get steam in and out. The brass stuff is basically some spanners or wrenches I had to make in order to adjust the piston valves. Keep going around, you can see these things with L on them. That's the front and rear cylinder covers for that cylinder. And then, or keep on going around, you can see some more cylinder covers that aren't complete. And then you see the piston valve liners. I use black Sharpies in order to, put marks so I can actually scribe and see what's happening. So one of the valve liners has black Sharpie marks on it. And, and basically there's a whole bunch of holes in the valve liner to let steam in and exhaust out and so on and so forth. So that's currently what I'm working on. I'm slowly working on the cylinders for this locomotive. A milling machine is the other big machine tool. It's great for making flat things, making bores and things, making, the lathe is good for making round stuff. The milling machine is good for making flat stuff. And that's one of my milling machines with my my Shay sitting on top of it. Now you may wonder, what am I doing that for? Well, I made a mistake when I did the hole in the top of the boiler for doing the sand dome. So it was off center. So I basically fixed it, and I did it on this milling machine. So fortunately, it's a light locomotive. I wouldn't want to do that with a full size. So yeah, other things I did, of course, the steps, buffer beams, a lot of stuff. Any flat surfaces or grooved surfaces are great with a milling machine. And I love computers and I love dabbling in all kinds of stuff. So this is a computer controlled milling machine. You'll notice there's no handles on it because there's no handles to twiddle. I did try using a game controller to help me control it just by hand. So you can see a game controller up there, for, like I'm playing a video game, except when you're playing a video game, you can shoot an aircraft, but when you're milling and you make a mistake, it makes a big noise. So I got rid of the game controller and I just used the computer basically to run things. So if you look at a full-size locomotive down at the Museum of Science and Technology, or whatever they call it these days, you notice a lot of the parts have the locomotive number stamped on them, because full-size locomotives and a lot of our model locomotives are made so the parts are made to fit. The nice thing about CNC machining is you can make parts that are interchangeable, so you don't need to bother having individual parts to fit individual locations. So you just make a bunch of them, and they all sort of fit, which is really kind of cool. So it simplifies things an awful lot. I also find if I need 4 of something, I'll make 5, because invariably if I make 4, I screw one up at a later operation, or I drop it and lose it. If you make 5, you never make any mistakes, so you have 1 spare. It's kind of weird how Murphy works in that regard. So I always try and make 1 more part, or sometimes a couple more parts than I need. I'm going to show you how sort of things go in terms of manufacturing this stuff. So this is on the left-hand side, you see the cover of the Shay book that I built this Shay locomotive from. And the middle section here is the chapter, or first page of the chapter. for making the headlight. You can see the middle page has got all these dimensions, and it's got very nice drawings. And on the right-hand page, you can see suggestions as to how to assemble things. You know, there's an exploded view, and it says small screws to hold things together, and you silver solder it, and eventually you machine it. So what I did is I basically followed that. So this is done on my manual milling machine. I just made the plates about right, screwed them together with screws. The heads are there because they're going to get machined off. The placement of all the parts isn't perfect, but it doesn't matter because you'll finish the shape later on. Here's the first stage of things. And what a neat thing about CNC machining is if you want to make a big hole, you don't need a big drill. The table sort of goes, you can move the table sort of in a circular motion while moving a cutting tool, an end mill down, and it'll create a nice big hole. It's really kind of cool. So that was the first step of creating a hole all the way through for the headlight. That's the headlight there is kind of like you're looking at it from the back of it. And the next page, maybe we'll make it more apparent. That's what it looks like. Basically, all the machining done for where the what do you call them? The reflector and the stuff around the front, the bezel, whatever that goes in. And you can see by the machining marks there that some of my silver soldering and placement wasn't correct, but that doesn't matter. You know, it's just the brass is there and it'll get machine finished later on. I made the reflector on my vertical CNC milling machine, which was great because I could create that spherical surface easily. On the left-hand picture, you see a bit of aluminum, and the spindle of my milling machine, you can see a lathe tool bit down on the bottom in a bench vise or in a vise in the milling machine table, and a tool bit sticking up, and it basically just cut that nice circular groove, and it looks pretty good. There it is all finished. So you can see, you know, the top's being machined nicely and the bezel's made and the reflector's in place, and I put in a little LED in there. So that's kind of how you make this stuff. I find it really kind of fascinating. The CNC stuff is, it's a lot of fun. It's great making all kinds of intricate parts. So you can make things that look nicer than just like a little bit of bar stock or whatever. I draw stuff up on a CAD program, and then I run it through a thing called CAM, which is, it takes the CAD program and puts it into code for the milling machine. And I put material on the bed of the milling machine. I push play, and in theory, I can go and wash the dishes, and sometimes I do, but it's always fun to watch what happens because it's fascinating how this stuff cuts and throws the swarf all over the place. You can watch it for hours. And with a screenshot there is just my CNC milling machine computer screen. It's in the middle of doing something for my 260, which are hangers to hold the leaf springs on the tender. There's the machine all set to be started. It's you can see there's like two bits of brass in there. One's a bottom block to hold. It's soft soldered bottom block to a bigger block on the top. The bigger block on the top will be with the machine, the thing that's machined. The bottom block is there just to hold it, and if I put a drill through, I don't go into my sub table. So that's the beginning of things. That's completed. All right. So if we go back one. That's what it looked before any machining happened. There's no holes drilled there. There's no machining done. That's it done. And you can see there's, you know, holes, like it almost looks like a cityscape, I think. And those in the know of British locomotives, you'll see I've got 4 extra parts, because that's me saying if I make the correct number, I'll end up screwing one up. So make more, and then you're assured to have the correct number. There they are, finished, ready to be put on the locomotive, and they are now. Actually, if you look closely, the bottom, there's one on the bottom about a third of the way in. It looks like an arrow pointing up to the left. It actually has got a mistake on it. The little blip on the top has got I made a mistake machining on my program. So that one is a failure. So there you go. You see, I made 4 extras. One was bad, so I got 3 spares. So fortunately, I made too many. So how long does this stuff take? Some people can make a locomotive in a year. They're good at it and they just enjoy doing that. I like to make parts as I go along. So how long will this next locomotive take? I have no idea. Maybe next year, maybe 10 years. I don't know. We'll find out. I just like making parts and it's fun. And people always ask me, so what's next? Maybe a Heisler locomotive. I've got a number plate off a German class 23262. And I thought, oh, that might be kind of cool. I also like rolling stock. And when I was a kid, I kept an article by Jack Work on his rail and tie car from, again, about early 70s. And that's always been on my list since the 1970s. So maybe I'll make that an HO scale or, 1/16th scale, or maybe I'll make something else in my workshop. It's all kind of fun. And, it's neat. So here's some links. We're getting to the end here. I like Shoreline lathes. I know Bill Meredith's got a Shoreline. I've been purchasing. I got some from John Litcherson at TLA, but I think he stopped business now. I picked mine up a few years ago, and I think they're great little machines. I'm very impressed with them. There's a forum, the second line there. There's a forum where people make stuff. They make locomotives. They make steam engines for boats. A guy doing steam engine for a boat. They make all kinds of stuff, and it's interesting seeing how people make things. I think that's fascinating. The third one is the local live steam club, and I think on tomorrow, on Sunday, they have an open house. I'm getting ready to go on a camping trip, so I won't be there. But I think it's open. You can check the website and see. If you're closer to Kingston, there's the Frontenac Society of Model Engineers in Battersea. That's another fairly local club. Now, I mentioned the second link about people making stuff. There's a fellow called Chris Ruby who's down in Rochester, New York. He built a Shea locomotive, much like mine, on his Shoreline equipment. He did it in about 9 months or something like that. And he was very, very good at photographing all his steps. And he's very approachable. He's building all kinds of neat stuff. But if you're interested in this at all, and interested in how to use Shoreline machines, keep this link and have a look at it, because it's a great resource. And for the last link, there is one it's that 16 millimeter gauge club in the UK. And what it is, they have a great resource on all kinds of stuff. It's for garden railways, but they're very good at collecting and giving out information. So I think that's it. I'm going to talk about right now. So we've been through what I think live steam is. I've shown you some of the locomotives that I have and that I'm making, and a little bit about my workshop. So I guess the next thing is it's over to you guys. So are there any questions or comments?